Okay, so everybody knows that Florida is a little different. If you've ever searched for Florida man or Florida woman, you know that the stories that you see tell you, pretty much everything you need to know that Florida can be a little weird. But did you know that doing real estate in Florida is different than other states? I'm going to give you 5 things that are different when you're looking at buying or selling in the state of Florida. Okay, so number one thing is title work. In the state of Florida, the seller customarily pays for title work. Now, that can be a good thing because it does save the buyer a little bit of money. The problem is that it can be a bad thing if the title company isn't really that great and they don't do a good job. I'll give you an example of this with a deal that I did a few years ago that kind of stands out in my mind. It was during hurricane season. And this particular deal, I had the listing, and I also had the buyer because my couple that was selling were also going to be buying. And so we had those 2 transactions, but then the other couples involved had their homes on the market, and they also had homes that they had put offers on. So altogether, we had like 6 or 7 really separate deals, all at the same time. And so any one of those in that daisy chain of transactions, any one of those that broke the link, then everything would just go belly up. Now, in the state of Florida during hurricane season, if a hurricane passes within a certain square, which is kind of a square mile radius, basically you can't get homeowners insurance. And if you can't get homeowners insurance, we can't continue the deal. And so it was during that time that a hurricane came through, and nobody could get homeowners insurance. All of the deals started to fall apart. Now, it took a lot of communication between myself, my wife, who's my transaction coordinator, and our title company with other agents that were involved in the transaction and their title companies. It took a lot of reassuring our customers, reassuring their customers that everything was going to be okay and that we'd be able to move forward. But some of these deals were time sensitive because we had people that had pretty much wanted to sell their home and immediately the next day take that money and purchase another home. And they already had things like movers on the way, all kinds of stuff was going on. And so when it comes to picking the right title company, making sure that that title company is going to do the work properly is pretty much essential. Now, we do have a couple of title companies that we work with that we recommend. But what happens when you're a buyer and the seller is the one who's picking the title company and you're not really sure if the title company is going to do their job? Now you're kind of stuck. So one of the things that we can do here in Florida is we can offer to pay for our title work. So as a buyer, you can pay your title work. You won't pay the seller's portion of their title work, but you'll pay your portion. And this would ensure you of having a title company that is going to do the job properly. So how much does that cost? Well, if you're looking at a median home value of $300,000 to $400,000, you're looking at about $1,500 to $2,000 added expense. Over the life of the loan, that's a few dollars a month. I mean, it's not that big a deal, but it could save you missing out on an opportunity to buy your perfect home. So think about that as you start getting closer to wanting to put an offer on a home or wanting to start looking at homes. That could be a very important decision if you feel that you can afford that extra little bit of money. Now, we also can take that and turn it into the loan, but that's something that we'll get into at another time. So that's number one. Have you been thinking about moving to Florida? Well, if you have, make sure you let me know. I would love to sit down and see what I can do to help you. You can get a hold of me by going to talkwithvince.com. That's www.talkwithvince.com, and schedule a Zoom call with me. If you're local in the area, let me know. I'd love to sit down, have a cup of coffee, soda, whatever you like, and we'll have a discussion. Hopefully we'll be able to schedule a buyer's consult, whether it's a Zoom buyer's consult or a in-person buyer's consult, so we can really get you moving in the right direction. Anyways, on to the video. Number two, I have customers that come from out of state, and one of the questions they ask me is, do I need an attorney? Well, in the state of Florida, you do not need an attorney to be able to put an offer on a home or to be able to list your home. Now, I know some states, like I've got a customer from Illinois, that's how they do business. They use attorneys for everything. Now, the way that Florida has dealt with this is, first of all, we have the Florida Association of Realtors, and as an extension of the Florida Association of Realtors, we also have the Florida Bar, which, is the legal representation for the Florida Association of Realtors. Well, what the Florida Association has done is they had come up with a litany, and I'm talking about a ton of paperwork from the Florida Bar Association. And so when you see a contract, on the bottom of it, it's going to say FAR Bar. So Florida Association of Realtors, Florida Bar. Okay, so the bar, the Florida Bar, the attorneys. And so sorry about that, I couldn't think quick enough. All right, so the main thing here is all of the documentation, whether it's a listing agreement, whether it's a buyer-broker agreement, or as-is sales contract, or any addendums, FHA, VA, any of that, HOA, whatever the case may be, all of that has been put together by an attorney. And all of that is provided to us as real estate professionals to be able to help you in buying or selling a home. And so you don't have to go through an attorney, which, number one, saves you a lot of money, but also, attorneys can sometimes kind of confuse the issue and make things a lot more unmanageable. And so with this, we have standardized contracts for pretty much every transaction. And then if we do need something out of the ordinary, which doesn't really happen that often, but if we do, then we can also, go to an attorney for that. But for the most part, all of this is done without an attorney. It's done through your realtor. In other words, I would pull a contract out, whether it's an as-is or a listing agreement. I would explain it to you, and then we would kind of move on with the process from there. So that's number two. Number three, everything in the state of Florida, every home in the state of Florida is sold as is with the right to inspect. Now, what that means is you have the right to inspect a property. It does not mean that you don't have to inspect or you shouldn't inspect. In other words, because it's as is, a lot of times people get the idea that because it's an as is sale, they can't have the property inspected. Well, that's completely off base. As is with the right to inspect basically means that the house is being sold as is, but you have the right to inspect it. And if there's something monumentally wrong with the house, you can go ahead and cancel the contract. Now, that brings me to something else. When we, let's say, for example, work together as I'm your buyer's agent, and we're going to put an offer on a home, we're going to look at how long of an inspection period we want. Now, I usually recommend somewhere between 7 and 15 days, so 7, 10, or 15. Now, excuse me. When we look at that inspection period, there are certain things that have to be done within that inspection period. Other things can be done before closing. So the first thing that has to happen is we have to get our inspection done, and after the inspection, we have to make sure that we know what repairs we're going to ask the seller for. Now, this is where people get really confused. Just because it's as is doesn't mean the seller necessarily won't repair anything. It is in the seller's best interest to take care of certain repairs that are important. And I'll give you a good example of this. I had a customer, young couple, him and his wife. They were looking at a house that was rehabbed. And the house on the inside looked fantastic. They did a great job with rehabbing this house, but they never went into the crawl space. So when the inspector, after we put our offer in, the offer was accepted, we had the inspection done. When the inspector went in, they noticed that up in the crawl space, right on top of, like literally touching the insulation, was bare wire. And so we ended up having to tell the seller, look, there's bare wire there. We don't feel, safe buying a house where there's bare wire touching insulation. It's a fire hazard. And so the seller took it upon themselves. They ended up spending about $1,500, and they redid all of that for us. So when you have a buyer that is a solid buyer, a buyer that can go all the way to the end, and you convey that to the listing agent and to the seller is going to be a lot more inclined to help you make some repairs that maybe they wouldn't normally have made otherwise. And so everything basically is negotiable. So when you're looking at all of this, just remember, as a real estate professional, I'm there to negotiate for you and make sure we can get these things done. Another quick example was a customer that I had that was looking at a little 2-bedroom, 1-bath house. They're, again, a young couple, and the house had window units. And the window units are loud. I hate them. I hate them with a passion. I always have. But for a long time, there wasn't enough really good technology to be able to replace them. Well, now we have split ACs. And split ACs are fairly inexpensive. So I did a little bit of negotiation. I brought up the price of the house a little bit and asked for some concession for the split ACs. And guess what? We got them. And so now they have one split AC in the living room and one in each bedroom. That house, if you want it to be, can be freezing cold. I have walked in there and I was like, man, I'm getting shivers. So there's all kinds of ways to kind of deal with this. All right, so number 4. There is something new, and I have it on one of my other videos. I'll post it up here so you can kind of get a better gist of the whole situation. But back in 2024, on August 17th, the rules for real estate changed. So as a buyer's rep, which I am a buyer specialist, when somebody wants me to show them a home, I can no longer just quickly start setting up showings for them. I have to have a discussion, let's just say, about commissions and have them sign a buyer-broker agreement. All of that has to be done prior to me being able to show homes. And so if you want to go look at homes, we have to deal with that. Now, the way that I deal with this goes a little bit above and beyond, okay? Because what I try to do is do a buyer's consult before we go show homes and before we sign a buyer-broker agreement. The buyer's consult is very educational. I've been told by my customers that it's like drinking out of a fire hose. I give you a complete rundown A to Z for how you buy a house in the state of Florida. I give you a complete rundown of what monies, what loans there are, pretty much everything that you would need to make good financial decisions for you and your family when it comes to buying a home. Now, even if you've bought and sold homes before in other states, you're still looking at some differences, and those differences can really kind of catch you. And so, my go-to is let's do a buyer's consult and then work our way through everything else. If you would like to do a buyer's consult, feel free to go to talkwithvince.com, www.talkwithvince.com, and just schedule an appointment with me for a Zoom call. If you're in the area, then let's meet up for coffee and see what we can do for you. Okay, last, closing costs are not fixed percentages. In some states, there are fixed percentages of closing costs, 2.5%, 3.5%, 4.5%, whatever the case may be. In Florida, they are not a fixed percentage, but I'm going to tell you something. That is a good thing. There have been a lot of times where I have seen agents put closing costs on a home that were well above what closing costs should be, even when I checked with another lender to make sure. And so I felt like customers were getting ripped off because, they were paying more in closing costs than they really needed to. And so with the state of Florida, being that we can negotiate through that, if we need closing costs, I can talk to your lender and say, okay, what do we need in terms of closing costs? And rather than them give me a percentage, I would much rather than give me a flat fee, whatever the fee is. So let's say, for example, closing costs are going to be $3,000, $5,000, $6,000. Now I know with that, if you need closing cost and down payment assistance, I can kind of work through the numbers, because without the numbers, we got nothing. And so what we want to do is we want to look at what the actual numbers are and then base all of our decision making and negotiation on those numbers, so you don't pay more, and so that we can figure out the best way to negotiate through a loan or a transaction with the seller to make sure that you end up in that house that you're looking for. So that's what I have for you. Those are the 5 things. If you want to, have a discussion with me, again, just go to talkwithvince.com, and I'll be more than happy to talk to you and see what I can do to help. Anyways, hope you have a great one. See you in the next video.